The moon hung high over the hidden kingdom, casting pale light over the dense Congo rainforest. A cold wind swept through the palace courtyard, where a small crowd had gathered. At the center stood Zalika, the rightful princess, her hands tied behind her back, her dark eyes filled with fear and defiance. Before her yawned a deep pit, its edges rough with tangled roots. From its depths came a low, rumbling growl. The golden eyes of lions glowed in the darkness below. Behind Zalika, standing tall and cruel, was Queen Nyah, her stepmother, dressed in royal silks, adorned with gold and jewels. She smirked, her voice like a dagger wrapped in silk. "You were never meant to rule, Zalika," she whispered. "Say hello to your new family." The guards beside Zalika tightened their grip. She struggled, but they were too strong. She turned to her father, the king, who stood nearby, his face empty, his eyes blank. The poison of Nyah's lies had clouded his mind. He said nothing. Her stepbrother Jabari looked away, his hands clenched into fists. He had always been weak, too afraid to stand up to his mother. Zalika's heart pounded. This was not how it was supposed to end. "Please," she gasped. "I am your daughter. I am your blood." Nyah only laughed. "Not anymore." She nodded to the guards. Zalika barely had time to scream before they shoved her forward. She fell. The world spun. Air rushed past her ears. And then, impact. She hit the ground hard, pain exploding through her body. Dust rose around her as she gasped for breath. Above, Nyah's face appeared at the edge of the pit. "Goodbye, Zalika." Then she was gone. Zalika pushed herself up, her body aching. A new sound filled the air, the deep rumbling growls of the lions. She turned slowly. From the shadows, they emerged. A massive lion, its golden mane wild and thick, stepped forward, his eyes locked onto hers. Behind him, others followed, silent, powerful, deadly. Her breath caught in her throat. This was it. This was how she would die. The alpha lion lunged. The palace was a place of beauty, but behind its golden walls lurked secrets darker than the night. And no secret was darker than the one Queen Nyah carried in her heart. She had played the game well. First, she had charmed the king. Then, she had poisoned his beloved wife. A slow, cruel poison. One that drained the life from the queen while Nyah stood beside her, pretending to be a loyal friend. She had comforted the king as he grieved, whispered the right words, shed the right tears. And when the time was right, she became his wife. But there was one problem. Zalika, the true heir, the rightful queen-to-be. And worse, the people loved her. They whispered of her mother's strength, her father's wisdom, and the fire in her eyes that reminded them of the great rulers of the past. As long as Zalika lived, Jabari would never wear the crown. Nyah had sacrificed too much to let that happen. She had removed one queen. She could remove another. But this time, it had to be clean. No poison, no traces, just an accident. No body, no questions. Night settled over the kingdom, covering the land in a heavy blanket of darkness. Nyah stood in her chambers, speaking in hushed tones to two of the palace guards. "You will take her far into the jungle," she instructed, her voice sharp as a blade. "The lion's den. Make it look like she wandered too far. No one will suspect a thing." The guards nodded, their faces unreadable. Gold had bought their silence. "And if she resists?" one of them asked. Nyah smiled coldly. "Then make sure her screams do not reach the palace." She dismissed them with a flick of her hand. By sunrise, Zalika would be gone, and the throne would finally belong to her son. Zalika had been dreaming of her mother. She could almost feel her soft hands stroking her hair, hear her gentle voice whispering, "You are strong, my child, stronger than you know." Then, pain. A rough hand clamped over her mouth. Her eyes flew open, panic rushing through her veins. Dark figures surrounded her bed. Guards. She tried to scream, but a cloth was stuffed into her mouth. Ropes tightened around her wrists. What are you doing?" she tried to say, but her voice was muffled. They didn't answer. They only dragged her out of the bed, forcing her forward. Her heart pounded. Something was wrong. Through the palace halls they went, moving like shadows. The king's chambers were close. Her father. If she could just... A guard yanked her back as she tried to turn. "Don't fight," he growled. Zalika's breath came in short, frantic gasps. They took her outside the palace gates where horses waited. The night air was thick, the jungle looming in the distance like a hungry beast. Zalika struggled, kicking, thrashing, but their grip was like iron. "Where are you taking me?" she screamed. No answer. only the sound of hooves as they rode into the night. The jungle was alive with whispers. Leaves rustled. Something moved in the shadows. Watching, waiting. The guards dragged Zalika from the horse, forcing her forward. Her feet scraped against the ground, bleeding. The air smelled of damp earth and something else, something foul. Then, through the trees, she saw it. A deep pit. Her breath caught. It was no ordinary hole in the ground. It was a den, a lion's den, and they were taking her straight to it. She dug her heels into the dirt. No, you can't do this. The guards didn't stop. Then, a familiar voice, cold, amused. Why fight it, dear girl? Zalika's head snapped up. There, standing at the edge of the pit, dressed in elegance and cruelty, was Queen Nyah, her stepmother. Zalika's blood ran cold. You, she breathed. You did this. Nyah tilted her head, smiling. Oh, child, did you really think I would let you take what belongs to my son? Zalika's hands trembled with rage. You'll never get away with this. Nyah laughed softly. And who will stop me? The words were a dagger to Zalika's heart. Nyah turned to the guards, nodding. Zalika's world tilted. Hands shoved her forward. She screamed. The ground disappeared beneath her feet. She fell. The air rushed past her, ripping the breath from her lungs. Then, impact. Pain shot through her body. Dust rose around her. The smell of death filled her nose. Above, Nyah's face disappeared from view. Silence. Zalika gasped for air, her body shaking. Then, a sound. Low, deep, hungry. Her stomach twisted. She turned her head. Golden eyes stared back at her. The lions had found their prey. The throne room, once a place of warmth and safety, now felt like a graveyard. Zalika knelt before her father, tears streaming down her face, her heart pounding in her chest like a war drum. Father, please, she begged, her voice raw with desperation. You know me. You raised me. I would never betray our kingdom. Her wrists burned from the tight ropes binding them, but the pain in her heart was worse. King Omari sat on his grand throne, but he was no longer the man she had known. His strong shoulders slumped, his once sharp eyes dull and distant. He had always been a just ruler, a loving father, but now he looked at her as if she were a stranger. Zalika searched his face for any sign of the man who used to carry her on his shoulders, who once promised to protect her from all harm, but all she saw was the shadow of a king. The poison of Queen Nyah's lies had seeped too deep. She is guilty, my king. Nyah's voice was like silk wrapped around a dagger. She stood beside the throne, draped in flowing robes, her expression one of practiced sorrow. She seeks to steal the crown from your son. She conspires against you. The punishment must be swift. Zalika shook her head, her eyes pleading. Jabari, tell him the truth. She turned to her stepbrother, her last hope, but Jabari wouldn't meet her gaze. His fists clenched at his sides, his jaw tight with conflict. He was no fool. He knew the truth, but fear had shackled him, just as surely as the ropes on Zalika's wrists. Father, Zalika tried one last time, her voice breaking. Do you truly believe I would betray you? For a moment, something flickered in the king's tired eyes. Doubt, guilt. But before it could take root, Nyah stepped closer, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. Your Highness, she whispered, she is a danger to us all. The king hesitated. Then, in a voice that barely sounded like his own, he spoke the words that shattered Zalika's world. Take her away. The guards grabbed her arms. She screamed, struggling against their grip. No, father, don't let them do this. But he did not look at her. He stared straight ahead, as if she no longer existed. Jabari turned his back. The palace doors swung open. The night air was cold, sharp against her skin as the guards dragged her into the darkness. The journey into the jungle was brutal. The path was uneven, roots and rocks cutting into Zalika's bare feet. Thick vines brushed against her skin, whispering against the wind like ghosts. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and unseen creatures lurking in the shadows. The only sound was the steady march of the guards and the distant howl of wild beasts. Zalika's wrists ached from the rough ropes, her body weak from exhaustion. But worse than the physical pain was the betrayal clawing at her chest. Her own father had cast her out. Her stepbrother had abandoned her. The kingdom she had loved and sworn to protect had turned its back on her. After what felt like hours, the group finally stopped. Zalika blinked, her vision blurring from exhaustion, and then she saw it. The pit. Deep, dark and yawning like the mouth of a beast, the lion's den lay before her. The ground around it was littered with bones, stripped clean. The air carried the foul scent of blood and decay. Zalika's stomach twisted. Queen Nyah stepped forward, her eyes gleaming with triumph. "This is where your story ends, girl," she said, her voice dripping with venom. "No body, no questions. The jungle will take you, just as it has taken many before." Zalika lifted her chin, swallowing her fear. "You can kill me, but you will never truly win," she spat. "The people will know what you are." Nyah smirked. "The people will forget you, a foolish girl who wandered too far. And when they mourn, I will comfort them, just as I comforted your father." The guards stepped forward. Zalika struggled, but their grip was iron. Nyah leaned in, whispering the last words Zalika would ever hear from her. "No one will remember you, girl." With a sharp shove, they pushed her forward. Time seemed to slow as she fell. The world spun. Her heart pounded in her ears. The wind roared past her. Then, impact. Pain exploded through her body as she crashed onto the hard ground. A sharp gasp left her lips, her lungs burning. Dust rose in thick clouds around her. Everything ached, but she was alive. A deep, rumbling growl filled the air. Zalika's breath caught. Slowly, she lifted her head. Golden eyes gleamed in the darkness. A dozen lions circled her, their powerful bodies sleek and deadly, their muscles tensed, their tails flicked. One of them stepped forward, its massive paws silent against the dirt. Its mane was thick and dark, its eyes sharp as blades. Zalika's body trembled. Her mind screamed at her to run, but there was nowhere to go. The lion took another step, then another. Then it lunged. The deep growls of the lions filled the air, sending chills through Zalika's body. The pit was dark, and the moonlight barely lit the golden eyes staring at her. Dust rose from the ground as the lions circled, their tails flicking, their muscles tense. They were ready to attack. Zalika's breath came in short gasps. Her hands shook as she reached down, her fingers closing around a sharp rock. It was small, almost useless against these powerful beasts. What could a rock do against their sharp claws and deadly fangs? But she held onto it tightly because she had nothing else. One lion stepped forward, larger than the others. Its mane was thick and wild, its body covered in old scars. The leader of the pride, it growled deeply, its lips curling to show long, sharp teeth. Zalika froze. This was the moment. Her heart pounded as the lion crouched, preparing to pounce. She clenched the rock, ready to throw it, even though she knew it would do nothing. Then something strange happened. Their eyes met. Time seemed to slow. The sounds of the night faded. Zalika expected to see hunger in the lion's golden eyes, the cold, merciless look of a predator about to kill. But instead, she saw something else. Recognition, understanding. The lion hesitated. The growl in its throat faded. Its ears twitched. The other lions, sensing the change, stopped moving. Their tails lowered. Their eyes remained on her, but their expressions softened. Then, something even more unbelievable happened. The great lion slowly lowered its head. Zalika's breath caught in her throat. One by one, the other lions followed, bowing their heads just like their leader. They were not attacking. She was not their prey. The rock slipped from her fingers and hit the ground. She barely noticed. Why weren't they killing her? She had heard stories about the lions of the jungle. They were ruthless. No one who fell into their den ever survived. She had been thrown in to die. But now, standing among these beasts, Zalika felt something strange deep inside her. She belonged here. The alpha lion stepped closer, its huge body only inches away. She could feel the warmth of its breath on her skin. The scars on its face showed battles fought and won. Her hand trembled as she slowly reached out. Every part of her wanted to pull back, to run, but something stronger told her to trust. Her fingers touched the lion's thick mane, software warm, powerful. The lion closed its eyes for a moment, breathing deeply. Then, it stepped back. The other lions moved too, creating space around her. They were no longer hunting her. They had accepted her. She had been thrown into the pit to die. Instead, she had been welcomed. Her heart pounded, but not from fear. She was no longer a princess of the palace. She was a queen of the wild. Zalika sat in the pit, her fingers still buried in the thick mane of the great lion. The warmth of his fur, the steady rise and fall of his breath, felt strangely familiar. She closed her eyes, and suddenly, a memory surfaced, a memory she had long forgotten. She saw her mother, standing at the edge of the royal gardens, a younger Zalika hiding behind her legs. A group of lions lay before them, their golden eyes calm, their tails flicking lazily. The queen held out a piece of meat, and the largest lion, the same one that stood before Zalika now, took it gently from her hand. "They will know their true queen," her mother had whispered, stroking Zalika's hair. "One day, you will understand." Zalika gasped, her eyes flying open. It couldn't be, but the memory was clear, as if the jungle itself had whispered it back into her mind. She looked around at the lions that now sat peacefully around her. They had not attacked her. They had not seen her as an enemy. They had bowed. She was meant to be here. The realization sent a shiver down her spine, not of fear, but of something far greater. A deep, unspoken bond tied her to these creatures. The stories about her mother had always seemed like legends, tales whispered by the palace elders. They had called her mother chosen by the spirits, a woman with a connection to the wild. And now, that same connection pulsed through Zalika's veins. For the first time since she had been betrayed, she did not feel lost. The jungle became her new home. She learned its ways, its dangers, its secrets. The lions became her family. They protected her, taught her, and guided her. She learned to move like them, to hunt, to listen to the whispers of the wind and the rustling of the trees. She was no longer a helpless girl thrown to die. She was becoming something greater, something powerful, something unstoppable. The years passed, and Zalika was no longer the frightened girl who had been thrown to the lions. She had become something more, stronger, faster, wiser. The jungle had reshaped her, molding her into a warrior. She moved like the wind, silent and powerful. She no longer feared the night, the wild, or even death itself. She had learned the ways of the beasts, and now she was one of them. The lions were her family. They had taught her how to hunt, how to sense danger before it arrived, how to survive in a world where only the strongest endured. She spoke their silent language, reading the flick of a tail, the shift of an ear, the deep rumble of warning in their throats. She belonged to the jungle now, and it belonged to her. But deep inside, she never forgot where she had come from. The kingdom, the palace, the betrayal, it all lingered in the back of her mind, like an unfinished story waiting for its ending. Sometimes, when she looked at her reflection in the water, she saw more than just a woman of the wild. She saw a queen in exile. Then one day, fate brought an answer. It was late afternoon when Zalika and her lions heard footsteps, human footsteps. They did not belong to hunters or warriors, but to a lone traveler. He stumbled through the jungle, his clothes torn, his face covered in sweat and dirt. Zalika, hidden behind the trees, watched him. The lions circled in the shadows, their golden eyes glowing. The man fell to his knees, breathing heavily, unaware of the danger around him. Zalika stepped forward, her movements swift and silent. The man gasped as he saw her emerge from the trees, her dark skin glowing under the fading sunlight, her braided hair wild and free, her eyes sharp as a blade. Behind her, the lions moved like ghosts, their presence both terrifying and majestic. The man's breath caught in his throat. He had heard stories of the jungle spirit, a woman who lived among the beasts, but he never believed them until now. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. His eyes locked onto hers, and then recognition dawned. His lips trembled as he spoke her name. Princess Zalika. Zalika did not answer at first. It had been years since she had heard her name spoken by anyone outside the jungle. She had buried that part of herself, let it fade like a distant dream. But now, as she stood before this man, something stirred inside her. The traveler fell to his knees. "It is you," he whispered. "I cannot believe it. You are alive." Zalika's eyes narrowed. "Who are you?" He swallowed hard. "I am Malik, a nobleman from the kingdom. I was loyal to your father before Queen Nyah took the throne." His voice wavered as he spoke the name. "She rules with cruelty. The people suffer. The land suffers. We need you, princess. The kingdom needs you." Zalika felt a storm rise within her chest. Nyah, the woman who had taken everything from her, who had stolen her father's love, poisoned his heart, and thrown Zalika to die. And now, she sat on the throne, her rule bringing suffering to the very people Zalika was meant to protect. She clenched her fists. The jungle had made her powerful. It had taught her how to fight, how to survive. But now, she understood why it had spared her. It had not been her prison. It had been her training ground. She turned and looked at the lions beside her. They watched her with knowing eyes, as if they too sensed that her time in the wild was coming to an end. She was not meant to remain hidden in the jungle forever. She was not meant to be just another creature of the wild. She was meant to be a queen. Taking a deep breath, she met Malik's desperate gaze. "It's time," she said. "Take me home." The royal palace was alive with celebration. Golden lanterns hung from every pillar, casting a warm glow over the grand hall. Music filled the air, drums echoing against the marble floors as dancers twirled in bright silks. Tables overflowed with food, and nobles laughed, their goblets brimming with wine. At the head of it all sat Queen Nyah, draped in luxurious robes, her jeweled crown sparkling under the lights. Beside her, Jabari sat tall, pretending to be the rightful heir. This was their world now, one built on lies, betrayal, and stolen power. Then, the ground trembled. A deep, guttural roar split through the night. The walls shook, the music stopped, the laughter turned to gasps. Every head snapped toward the grand entrance, and there she stood, Zalika, draped in furs, her dark skin glowing in the torchlight, her hair braided with golden beads that shimmered like the stars. Her eyes burned with a fierce fire, the fire of someone who had walked through death and returned stronger. But she was not alone. Behind her, 12 lions strode into the hall, massive, powerful, their golden eyes scanning the terrified crowd. Their tails flicked, muscles tensed, ready to strike if commanded. The people stepped back, hands covering their mouths, hearts pounding in their chests. Whispers spread like wildfire. "The lost princess! She lives! The spirits have returned her!" The crowd began to bow, one by one, falling to their knees in awe. She was not just Zalika anymore. She was something more, something greater. The jungle had forged her into a legend. Jabari's goblet slipped from his fingers, crashing against the floor. His body stiffened as he stumbled back, his face pale as if he had seen a ghost. He had. Nyah gripped the arms of her throne, her knuckles turning white. For the first time in her life, she looked afraid. This was not the weak girl she had thrown into the wild. This was a warrior, a queen in her own right, a storm waiting to strike. Zalika took a step forward, the lions moving with her. The hall was silent. The only sound was the deep, steady breaths of the beasts at her side. Then she spoke. "Did you think I was gone?" Her voice was calm, but the weight of it crushed the air. "Did you think the jungle would take me? That your betrayal would erase me?" Nyah opened her mouth, but no words came. Zalika smiled, slow and knowing. "You made one mistake, Queen Nyah." She tilted her head, eyes gleaming. "You should have made sure I was dead." Nyah's heart pounded in her chest as the lions closed in. Their golden eyes locked onto her, their heavy paws silent against the stone floor. She stumbled back, her mind racing for a way out. The crowd that once cheered for her now watched in silence, their faces filled with something she had never seen before, contempt. Zalika stepped forward, slow and deliberate, her gaze never leaving the woman who had stolen everything from her. The furs draped over her shoulders made her look like a goddess of the wild, untamed and unstoppable. The air was thick with tension, thick with the weight of justice finally catching up. Nyah's voice trembled as she raised a desperate hand. "Guards, seize her!" But no one moved. The royal guards, the very men who had once obeyed her every order, exchanged glances. Their hands lingered near their swords, but not a single one was drawn. One guard, an older man with battle scars on his face, stepped forward. "We swore to protect the rightful ruler," he said firmly, "not a usurper." Nyah's breath hitched. She turned to Jabari, her last hope, but he wouldn't even meet her gaze. He had lived in the shadow of her cruelty for too long. Now he lowered his head like a coward. The walls of her stolen kingdom were crumbling. Zalika took another step closer, her voice calm but sharp as a blade. "You threw me to the lions," she said, tilting her head. "But you forgot something." A slow, knowing smile spread across her lips. "I am one of them." Nyah's knees buckled. The reality crashed into her. There was no escape. The people, once deceived by her lies, now saw the truth. Murmurs turned into shouts. "Justice!" one man cried. "Banish her!" Another voice echoed. The crowd swelled with anger, years of silent suffering now boiling over. The palace guards moved at last, not to protect Nyah, but to seize her. They grabbed her arms, dragging her forward. She screamed, kicking and twisting, but there was no mercy in their grips. "No, you need me. I made this kingdom strong." Zalika watched in silence as Nyah's desperate pleas fell on deaf ears. Jabari took a step forward, his voice barely above a whisper. What What will you do with her?" Zalika looked down at the woman who had stolen her family, her throne, her very life, and then she made her choice. Exile. The word was final, carrying the weight of a true queen. Let the world decide her fate. Nyah's eyes widened in horror. "No, you can't do this. I was the queen." But her screams faded as the guards dragged her out, her jeweled crown slipping from her head, rolling across the stone floor. No one picked it up. No one cared. Zalika turned back to the crowd. The people bowed, not out of fear, but out of respect. She had returned, not as a lost princess, but as something far greater, as their queen. The lions at her side sat tall, their golden eyes watching as Zalika stepped toward the throne. She ran her fingers over the armrest, the weight of destiny settling over her. She had been thrown away, betrayed, cast into the wild to die. But she had risen, she had survived, and now she would rule, not with fear, but with the strength of a woman who had walked through fire and emerged unbreakable. The lions remained by her side, not as beasts, but as symbols, symbols of her power, her resilience, her right to lead. As the sun set over the palace, casting long shadows across the hall, Zalika took her place. The kingdom had been saved, justice had been served, and a new era had begun. Betrayal may wound, but true strength rises from the ashes. The ones meant to destroy you may unknowingly prepare you for greatness. A true queen is not made by birth, but by fire, survival, and destiny. If you loved this story, there's more waiting for you. Click on the next video and continue your journey into tales of power, betrayal, and triumph. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us for the next legend.